to the entertainer talking sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Before I get started on the video, just want to let everybody know that tonight, much like 2 weeks ago when I did Micah Parsons, I'm going to be premiering a film breakdown, if it fits my schedule, with Caleb Farley. Again, that is a live chat. It is not a live video. It is pre-recorded. It is with Alex and Anthony. So if you want to come by for that, for a potential first-round pick for the New York Giants in Caleb Farley, please do so. Come on over and hang out. Probably be around 8 o'clock. But in this video, being that it's a dead time, I did this last year. I kind of wanted to go over, if I was the general manager for the New York Giants, how I may prioritize things and kind of go over some of the options that I think the New York Giants could have going into free agency. And it's not even necessarily going to be picking out individual players. It's kind of giving you guys a realistic landscape of free agency and some of the things that I could see the New York Giants doing to try to create some cap space. And then when they do that, which players I could see the New York Giants targeting. Of course, unlike last year where we didn't really have any prominent names that were hitting the open market that we thought they'd be bringing back, the Giants have two players in Dalvin Tomlinson and Leonard Williams. And I'm going to go over just how much I think in the end those players will cost and whether or not the New York Giants will do that and kind of show you some of the options that the New York Giants will have if they bring back both or if they only bring back one. And I think in the end, they probably will definitely bring back one. And I think it's very possible they could bring back both. But it's, far from a foregone conclusion. It's going to come down to what these players command on the open market and whether or not they're willing to fit within the New York Giants budget. Of course, Dalvin Tomlinson has come out and said that he wants to be a New York Giant and almost insinuated that he would be willing to take a hometown discount. But we'll see when the dollars and cents come out whether or not both these players want to come back with the New York Giants. I always say Leonard Williams, you'd be able to if you were to let him go, you would get a compensation pick for him. You'd also have the option of franchise tagging both of these players, which I didn't go over in this video. But Dalvin Tomlinson would be about 13. To my understanding, Leonard Williams would be about 19 or 19 and a half. The other thing I also want to talk about is I'm going to talk about the structuring of these contracts. Being that the cap more than likely will be down, according to Spotrac, they're estimating $185 million as opposed to $198 last year when they were projecting that it would go up before the pandemic. A lot of these contracts of players that you bring in will be structured to fit the cap in the future. So that has to be factored in as well. So you may see $20 million in cap space, but the way these teams, in my opinion, are going to go about doing this is backloading these contracts to make it fit within the budget. So let's jump into the New York Giants cap space as of now, and that is exactly what it is. If you look on the bottom line there, as I've gone over in the past, it is $8.1 million off the projected $185 million salary cap. Of course, it could be $180. That is the floor right now. Could be $190. Who knows? Maybe it could be $195, and maybe they'll have more money than this. But I'm going to do this exercise based on a $185 million cap. So let's jump right into it and talk about some of the options that the New York Giants have and how I could get to that to as high of a number within reason to spend on potential free agents. So this is what I came up with. Of course, right now, like I said, they have about $8.1 million. The first name that is obvious is cutting Nate Solder. No, Nate Solder will not be back. He may very well retire, and if you do it after June 1st, it saves you 10. So that 8 gets bumped up to 18.1. I personally would prefer to restructure Kevin Zeitler. Of course, you could cut him. That would save you 12. My option, I decided to restructure Zeitler and pay him 3 years, $33 million. This year, he's due $14 million. So you say to Zeitler, we're going to give you more long-term security, and you give yourself some wiggle room maybe at the end of it where you could get out after 2 years. I think right now, our guards, I just don't trust them, and if I restructure them for 3 years, $33 million, the way I would handle it is I'd pay him $9 million in the first year and $12 million on average over years 2 and 3 based on the salary cap, which would save you an additional $5 million. So now that 8.1 has jumped up to 23.1. The next thing I would do would be to cut Golden Tate, which would save me 6.1, which bumps me up to 29.2. Then I'd restructure Blake Martinez. He's due 20.25, I think it is, over the next 2 years. He's due 10.25 this year. I would give him an extra year on the contract and essentially give him the same contract I did when we signed him. I think it was 3 years, $30 million. It would now be an additional year, so we'd still owe him 3 years, $31 million, but I'd pay him 8 in the first year, which would save me an additional 2.25. So now the 8.1 has now become about, I think it's about $31 or $32 million in that area. Then I'd restructure Sterling Shepard. I'd pay him $6 million as opposed to $9 million this year and pay him $12 million in each of the 2 following years, or right around there. But I'd backload the contract a little bit more than the way it is now. He's due to make $9 million this year. I'd pay him an additional $1.5 million over the next 2 years to take off a little bit of a cap hit with the salary the way it is. That would get me to 35. Then I would make those 4 cuts that we talk about all the time in Levine, Toilolo, Pulley, Mayo, and Core. That would get me to 45. That saves an additional 10. And with some other small cuts and restructuring, I figured a fair number to be able to operate in free agency is approximately $48 million. You could round up to 50. You could say 45 if you want to be conservative. I gave myself $48 million. Now, what would I do with that $48 million in terms of the players on a roster? Well, I think you got to start with Leonard Williams, and I think you got to start with Dalvin Tomlinson. Leonard Williams, I think a realistic, if we're going to bring him back, rate that we hopefully could bring him back at is 4 years, $76 million. That's $19 million a year. The way that I would structure it, if I had to do this, would be $16 million in the first, $20 million on average over the last 3 years, with the ability to get out after 3. I would structure it that way to give myself some freedom to get out after 3. In an ideal world, I'd love to sign him to only a 3-year deal, and I'd love to get him for $17 or $18 million. I think the market dictates, even with the shrunken cap, he's going to get at least $17.5 to $18 million a year. He could get upwards of 20 or more. If I could get him for 4 years, $76 million, I think that's the going rate. Dalvin Tomlinson, I would be willing to go 3 years, $33 million. Of course, like I said, you could franchise tag him for 13. I would do it $9 million in the first, $12 million the next 2 years after that. If you add up the 16 and 9 just for this year's salary cap, which is what this video is about, it would leave you with $23 million of cap space. It's a combined $25 million off the 48. That leaving you with $23 million. Now, before I get into some of the players that I think the New York Giants could target with that $23 million, I think you also have to factor in draft expenses. That's something that nobody ever talks about. This year, the draft expenses are going to be cheaper than in prior years. This year, the draft expenses should be about $7 million based on where we're picking, based on the shrunken cap. Last year, I think it was about $4 million or thereabouts to Mekhi Becton, who was the 11th overall selection. And as you know, there's a rookie scale. So let's just say it's $4 million for our 11th overall pick. And then we only have 5 other draft picks after that. And second round and later, they're not making a ton of money. So we're going to take that 7, we'll say 7, and knock it off of the 23. It leaves you with $16 million if you were to bring back both Dalvin Tomlinson and Leonard Williams, and they got those salaries, which I think is realistic. So with that $16 million, you don't have a ton of wiggle room. At that point, I think you're using some of it to improve offensive line depth. I'm not going to get into exact names, but guys that are backup offensive linemen and possibly a second corner. And the names I brought up in the past are William Jackson, Xavier Rhodes. Spot Track estimates them to be in the $8 million range. And if not for one of them, you could bring in maybe a mid-tier wide receiver with Curtis Samuel. Okay? I think that's what you're looking at in that ballpark if you were to bring back both Dalvin Tomlinson and Leonard Williams. And you made all those moves that I said. I think it would give you enough wiggle room to add one piece to this roster, whether it be a mid-tier wide receiver or whether it be a mid-tier cornerback, which would shore up that cornerback 2 position. Now, if you didn't bring back Leonard Williams, that would tack on an additional $16 million because I structured it in a way it was 16, 20, 20, 20, 20. So an extra $16 million, well, that could do a lot of things for you. Yes, it would give you the ability to go out there and sign a premier wide receiver, right? If you didn't bring back Leonard Williams. The thing is, are you going to be able to get that wide receiver? Everybody says, yeah, I want Kenny Golladay. Yeah, I want Allen Robinson. Do they want to come here? But it would give you that ability if you didn't bring back Leonard Williams to sign one of those premier wide receivers. If you didn't sign Dalvin Tomlinson, but you brought back Leonard, because I think we all agree they're probably bringing back at least one, I don't necessarily know if it gives you enough in the budget to bring in a premier wide receiver. But if you don't bring back Dalvin, I think the option it gives the New York Giants is potentially to take the $10 million, or I think it was $9 million in my scenario, that I'd be paying Dalvin, and pay that to a guy like Curtis Samuel, and still have enough money to also bring in a second corner, which may be, in my opinion, in the end, the best option and the option that I would go with if I were the New York Giants. I would not be opposed at all, though, to keeping this defense intact and bringing back Dalvin Tomlinson and Leonard Williams and addressing one of those needs with a moderate corner or a mid-tier wide receiver. But if you weren't to bring back Dalvin, well then I think there is enough in the budget, if you manipulate it in a certain way, to bring in a guy possibly like William Jackson or Xavier Rhodes And in addition to that, bring in a mid-tier guy like Curtis Samuel at the wide receiver position, and then still try to fill in the rest of your needs with the draft. But in the end, I don't think the Giants are going to have a ton of salary to spend if they bring back Leonard Williams and Dalvin Tomlinson. I think the New York Giants have to at least entertain that, being that you don't want this defense to start to fall off after a strong year. If you ask me, I think the Giants are going to attack defense heavily in this year's free agency period to make sure it gives them the freedom to go heavily with offense in the draft. But if you don't bring back Dalvin, you could very well sign both a wide receiver and a corner. Maybe there's enough in the budget if you structure it a certain way. If a guy like Allen Robinson is available to bring him in and Leonard Williams, it makes it much more realistic, though, if you sign Dalvin and not Leo, to be able to get one of those top-tier guys. I've been on record as saying I don't think we're going to be able to get one of those top-tier guys, and it's not even necessarily a salary thing. I think it's a want for them to come here. The best option, if you're able to get one, would probably be a tag and trade. But realistically speaking, if we're looking to bring in guys, I think it'll be a mid-tier wide receiver like Curtis Samuel, and I think it'll be a mid-tier cornerback. I think that's what will fit the budget, and I think those will be the New York Giants options. If you weren't to bring back Dalvin Tomlinson, I would expect the New York Giants to prioritize an interior defensive lineman in this year's draft. If you didn't bring back Leonard, the other option you could have would be to possibly bring in a guy like Hassan Reddick or Carl Lawson with that money to try to fulfill the pass rusher need that you would lose with Leo, who of course had 11.5 sacks last year for the New York Giants. But that's the way I see it in a general vacuum of where the New York Giants could be attacking in this year's free agency period. Of course, we're going to hear rumors as it approaches and gets closer as to what players the New York Giants could be targeting, but I just wanted to give a general landscape with about a month to go before free agency as to what I expect from the New York Giants as we get underway. As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.